Aquarius is the last of the air signs. The air being the human signs, because they're without any particular creature. They're not bestial or animal. They are depicted by glyphs which are either depict people doing things or just somehow graphic rather than glyphic images of animals. The air signs are the sphere of knowledge, because that's what differentiates us in a way from the animals, is the power of self-reflection, the power of ability to create ideologies, to create thought patterns, in which we'll embody our experience. Now in Gemini, those thought patterns are connected to the individualized experience, and so that they can build a body of knowledge out of which to develop. They're linking things together. That's its chief faculty. In Libra, the second air sign, it's the idea in them. The ideal is that there are two halves of something that make a whole, and this is what gives it its quality in terms of relating, or its association with marriage partnerships and the ideal of balance and relationship. Well, Aquarius, in its modern myth, has two wavy lines, one above the other. Each one of these actually is significant. But what this means is it's not just a relationship with two halves, it's the relationship of oneself to the entire cosmos. So it goes from the relationship of individual things to individual things, what their names are, it's the holding of hands that we touched on in Gemini. Between couples, this kind of ideal relationship and a balance between the forces of inner and outer, or masculine, feminine. And then this is the relationship to the entire field. So Aquarius in itself represents some form of pattern that connects us to the whole. In older astrology, or more ancient astrology, it was called the collective mind. As if there is some kind of etheric library out there we can tap into. Some people call it the Akashic record. In Theosophy, this is known as. In other spheres, it's an attempt by people, particularly of an intellectual persuasion, to create theories and dynamics of the cosmos. Now, this can be on esoteric lines or spiritual lines, or it can be even in scientific lines. So an interest in cosmology and things like that, where the universe came from, and planets and galaxies. But the idea here is that it's the mind which is taken aloft into the ethereal planes of heaven and beyond. Now, how do we get there from the fact that it is the pourer of water from an urn? How do we connect Aquarius, which is the water pourer or the water bearer, to this image? Well, in Egypt, one of the earliest mythologies of Aquarius is it was ruled by the god of the Nile, who was called Hapi or Happy. And the idea of this was a kind of imaginative person who poured divine water out from the heavens and into the river Nile, and then when it flowed out, it would flow back up into the heavens, as if this water bearer or cup bearer, as it became known in Greek myth through Ganymede, has this sense that somewhere high on a mountain there is the source of this body of life. But this is important in its differentiation between itself and water. It isn't a water sign, it's an air sign. It's as if the waters they're not irrelevant, because they bring humanity. They bring along kind of social organizations. When the flood of the River Nile took place, along its banks were certain societies that built up, and farming industries, and it brought life to the land and the plants and communities. And in that sense, Aquarius has a connection to how it brings things, lots of communities together. Thus, its relationship to groups and associations and fraternities and large-scale organizations which connect up through usually a single form, a common bond, if you like. But they saw the sign of Aquarius as the flooding of the Nile because even though it was flooded during the summer months of Cancer and Leo, opposite to Leo is Aquarius. And in Aquarian, in Egyptian astrology, the signs were thought to be where the moon was, because during the day they couldn't see the constellations, so they could see the full moon in Aquarius, and so therefore believe that month was the Aquarian rather than the Leo month. So Aquarius is given that god, Hapi, who pours water in and out from the heavens. And so there's that imaginative depiction of where it comes from. There's the creation, the early creation of a cosmological theory that there is a divine link between the individual and the heavens. So in Aquarius we have another sign of the family, but it isn't the matrix, it isn't the sociological family unit of Cancer, it's the human family, it's that which surrounds us all. So what we have intrinsically in the sign is a sense that in every, no matter what culture, no matter what difference, no matter what age, no matter what religion, there is in some sense this common bond between all living forms of humanity, and maybe even an interconnecting web of all life. This was seen quite a couple of decades ago in the regeneration of the idea of the anima mundi, the soul of the world, the fact that it was connected, it was one gigantic organism. Like the cosmos itself is an organism, all connected by certain subtle laws of which Aquarius has an interest in. What drives these planets around the solar system? What are the driving forces? It has a deeply inquiring mind into the cosmological. But in the heart, it represents, I suppose, a universal kind of love, a desire to get to the common bonds between individuals, which is why it's called the sign of humanitarianism. Jung, the great psychologist, was a Leo, so he was interested in this individual personal self-development through the heroic struggle to find the individual self. But his Aquarian ascendant also led him to find the roots of that. The path of that was that he brought up this idea or remade the idea of the archetypal forms, certain patterns within us and within humanity which connect us all: love, life, death, birth, mother, father. These are the shadow, evil, good. These are all qualities that every single person shares, perhaps even every creature shares. And so we have a high form here of cosmological idealism, that there is a pattern that protects, the pattern that connects indeed. So in the more other kind of correspondences of Aquarius, the more traditional forms, that's why Aquarius in medical astrology rules the system of veins and arteries throughout the body. It's the channels through which things flow. You see, this is the water pouring from heaven. It isn't the water, it's the channel, the flow, the creation of the air and the communities. It's not the vessel, but the act of pouring itself. Out it comes, and it's as if it flows everywhere. So this is a source of, I wouldn't call it divine knowledge, but it's certainly a knowledge of the cosmos. Many Aquarians have an interest in metaphysical theories, in alien technologies. Some even say, after the goddess Urania, which rules the sign, Uranus and Urania rule the sign of Aquarius, say that it is the sign of astrology, as if it's a kind of leading light, the new age, the Aquarian age to come, or that we're actually in. Now, I'd like to just talk a little bit about what traditional astrology calls the problem of the sign in Aquarius, and they call it being the sign of its detriment. Because the sun is the mythic hero, or the challenge to find our individual and unique place in life, each sign tells us the fundamental pattern of doing that. But how do we do that when the very concept of Aquarius is about us, all of us, everyone, everywhere, anytime? It's a kind of eternal connection to the all. All of these words are very Aquarian, and it can be quite disconcerting when I've seen Aquarians in consultation, and they start talking about we. I remember my mother, who had a Aquarian emphasis in her chart. I always wondered when she used to say, well, they say this, or they say that. And of course, as a Virgo ascendant, I would turn around and say, well, who are they? And she would get rather annoyed at this, as if they was a kind of a common wisdom. It was widely known that. Ordinary common sense, perhaps. So this they say, but wanting to find the particular and the actual original source was not a thing that Aquarians do too much. They're too busy looking at everything. It's the field of the clouds, the atmospheres that Aquarians create are kind of a high ideal somewhere, as if there's a perfected universe that they're always seeking. And it's this idea of perfectionism which is both the quality of the cosmic ideal, but can also lead to some of the flaw inherent within the sign, and that will come to next. Now, in the natural yearly cycle, this is the 11th stage. And we can see that, and we can see all these symbolisms connect and relate to one another when we understand at that time winter is being fixed. It starts in Capricorn, which is the cardinal sign at the winter solstice, but it is fixed in place in Aquarius through the late January and early February. So how does this relate to cosmos when the barren wastes of winter have kind of taken place and there isn't any growth or any development? Well, on thinking through this, I think that we can understand the natural symbolism arising from the fact that the roots of existence, the tree systems, the earth, the systems underneath still all connect. And it's as if whether we see it as a system of connectedness through the upper world or the lower world doesn't really matter. See, some Aquarians are great ecologists. They're looking out at the natural environment. They want to save humanity. There is this sense sometimes of a mission about saving the entire human race, drawn into a cosmic ideal of a perfected human race, a perfected humanity. This is never more the case with the vision of Prometheus, that god that stole fire from heaven and gave man a kind of divine spark of life. What Prometheus wanted is very much connected to the sign of Aquarius, because he wanted progress. He wanted consciousness to become alive and to invent things and to create for itself. But for this knowledge he got punished. And he got punished by Zeus, and Zeus being a kind of primitive form of nature at that time, not wanting to give the enlightened consciousness or the spark of a self-reflective consciousness to mankind, just keeping it at the animal level, which is why these are called the human signs and related to thinking, that capacity to self-reflect. There's an interesting tale also from the point of this punishment. Zeus tried to give Prometheus a woman called Pandora. That was his gift. But Prometheus, whose name actually means forethought, could see into the future that there might be something wrong with this gift. And so what happened, Zeus, he kindly said no. But what happens is Zeus gave it to his brother, Prometheus' brother, which is the lower end. The upper end is Prometheus, the one that wants to create a progressive mankind. The one underneath is more ruled by Saturn. The one on the top is ruled by Aquarius, ruled by Uranus, two planetary rulers of the signs. Zeus gave the brother Epimetheus Pandora, And well, we all probably know the story. Pandora came with a box, and what happened was Epimetheus, his name, that actually means afterthought. So it's like reflective thought, but you have to get involved in something and then you reflect on it. Whereas Prometheus had forethought, progress, human invention, civility, laws of social, ethical codes, all of that kind of progressive thinking, where mankind could be progressively interwoven as a global community or a global network. So Pandora opened the box, and out comes all the flaws, all the difficulties. And this is one of the difficulties that Aquarians so often have if they're looking through that lens and that lens only, which of course is not true, because we've all got all the signs in us and various planets are in other signs, and this gives us indications that we have different affinities with different groups of planets and signs. But we're talking about the sun here. We're talking about what makes most sense. We're talking about, when we're talking about the sun sign, we're talking about that pattern which seems to integrate or coordinate the rest. And so our center often revolves around the sun sign. We may have other conflicting planets hitting the sun, but essentially if we're not doing the sun, we're not being, we don't have a central authentic self or a journey to go on in which to achieve things in a sense of ultimate fulfillment. So this is the problem inherent in the flaw of the sign, is that it seeks a cosmic ideal, a heavenly man to embody, but actually it wants to get away from the instinctual, from the physical body, which has limitation. It wants to get away from those things that are flawed, and in particular the water signs. I think they have a fear in general of emotional intimacy. And what can often happen is that if it touches it too powerfully, if they're asked for an empathic relationship, particularly with one person or one thing, they move away from it in a kind of a state of sometimes dissociation or trying to rise above it. They're always talking about generalities and universal principles rather than the individual and unique and distinct qualities of a person, which they find extremely difficult actually to live by or live with. So the tendencies in the psychology of this sign is to a sense of the impersonal. Sometimes there can be a hiding behind their theories, because air signs always have to make a theory out of something in order to protect themselves from the intimate involvement on the emotional level. It's not that Aquarians can't do that, it's just that they must always touch base with what is, what their relationships or what they're doing in life in relation to the cosmic whole. Its gift, of course, the cosmic ideal of a sense of solidarity. This is why you get unions and fraternities or groups or associations which bind together and form a whole. This is why Aquarius relates to the idea that it's to do with friendships, or the society of friends, because friends aren't blood brothers, but they're brothers by comradeship. Comrade is interesting in this regard because comrade actually means in the same room. So it's as if sometimes people can have a collegiality, a friendliness, because they're in the same situation, a dangerous situation, and somehow there's this, they unite, they create a united front to protect themselves against the forces of chaos, forces of darkness, the instinctual, the weather, the difficulties, the invader. So out comes this capacity to unite, to the mythic membership process of involvement with the community and society at large. I think perhaps one of the most profound outpourings of an Aquarian that I've ever seen comes from the 20th and the 21st century philosopher and writer Ken Wilber. He has various planets in Aquarius and various planets in various signs of air signs. I think he's got 5 air signs. His work, it covers a kind of holistic perception and a system in which he basically calls a theory of everything. That might sound rather intellectually superior, but I don't think he means it this way. he started a group called at the Integral Institute in Boulder, Colorado. And it spread out, not only on the internet, but various things about this integrated network. And through it, and through a study of his theories and his ideas over the last 20 years, I can see this Aquarian vision has managed to put in place where psychology fits, spirituality, arts, religion, morals. He's managed to find a kind of group pattern of overall connection and evolving progress. In fact, he places at the center of his theories this idea that there is an evolvement, there is an evolving consciousness going on, right from amoeba, from the atomic level, right down, and then in life sees this progression of ever-evolving wholes, of which the individual is between the heavens and the earth. And we come back to that idea that the human vehicle itself, the human situation, has a spiritual aspect and a lower aspect. Ken Wilber has meditated for over 30 to 40 years. He knows what he's talking about. In the early part of his life, he committed many years, perhaps at least a decade, to solid writing. Such was his passion about this mystical, or rather cosmological vision. His book, Sex, Ecology, Spirituality, The Theory of Everything, Up from Eden, which is a series of socio-cultural developments in consciousness, the Atman project, which is the project from birth to death and beyond. All of these books cover the Aquarian vision of how everything fits together. And when it's understood, I think he has truly managed to find an individual voice within all this collective knowledge. I think he's managed to find a balance between them, the individual and the collective, the theory and how to apply it in actual practice in the individual circumstances. There are a few more things I'd like to say about Aquarius before we move on to a conclusion. Some of it has already been mentioned in the myth of Prometheus, but what I'm trying to get at with Prometheus is that he although he expresses this lofty, noble ideal for knowledge, the knowledge of everything, so that he can see everything and put it in its place, so he can somehow help humanity to generate a creative spirit of evolution and progress. What eventually happens is that unfortunately, when you come into that knowledge, Aquarius can sometimes somehow distance itself by an impersonality against what's wrong, against the ugliness, against the difficulties. That's the theme of Pandora's box. When you open doors of knowledge, you also see the irrational sides of life, the body, the deformities, the difficulties, the inconsistencies and irrationalities which so dog Aquarius. Many Aquarians make fine scientists, maybe even astrologers. They're looking, as I say, about the objective universe or the way things work. This is why I think in the age of Aquarius we've had a lot of tendency more towards the technological, the scientific explanation of things, rather than the rather romantic, mythic dimensions of life. But impersonality has its problems, because what happens is, it tends to diminish the body, it tends to diminish the strength or power or importance and significance of the individual, because the individual is just but one in a large, one person in a large group. So this sway of the group can, in fact, act like an ideology, or what, to use a phrase from Liz Green yet again, she calls the Aquarian shadow that of the ideological hobby horse that Aquarius can get on, imposing its ethical standards, its moral codes, its understanding, not realizing that in any individual case the person might not be up to achieving the ideal. This is why also Aquarius, I think, has a strong connection to those religious or philosophical orientations which are impersonal, such as, for example, Buddhism, which doesn't have a personal God at its heart. Therefore, there's a kind of ultimate compassion for lots of things, but there's no kind of individual at the heart of it. So there's, again, this subtle rising above, or superiority, not realizing that the waters pour both from heaven into the earth and from the earth back into heaven, as if there should be this kind of divine flow of knowledge of the human and the material realm, and etc. Sometimes Aquarians are so a little bit too far removed, or so removed that they have these strange things go on in the body, and they don't quite know where they're from. So in relationship, therefore, Aquarians need to always find a space for themselves, a kind of freedom where they are can be by themselves as well as in a relationship. Because it is the sign which is, as I say, to do with the advancement of consciousness, and for that one needs to dwell on higher things other than the washing up. Although if you bring a kind of mindfulness state to everything that you do, even the ordinary can become spiritual and a way to achieve a kind of more advanced level of consciousness. I was trying to think of a figure of Aquarius that I could focus on, and two come to mind. One is a figure who plays Jack Frost in A Touch of Frost in a British detective series some time ago. He's an Aquarian, and he actually portrays this kind of Aquarian detective whose life seems to be wedded to his job, his ideology. He dislikes the violent criminal, but also has a kind of secret understanding for those people that stray off the path, that find life too difficult. He gets excited by this idea of just trying to find his place in the world, and so therefore contributing to the group as a whole, so that it can somehow function more smoothly. His downside, of course, is always that of his personal relationships are always being subjected to second place in relation to this more ideological or way of being that he is bringing to the role of his duty as a detective. The other is, I think, a more scientific trend in religion is more towards, I think, Scientology. Where there are technologies of mind which have become so prevalent in modern day. I'm not suggesting that all Aquarians become Scientologists, but I think that this idea that they can use, as I say, a technology of the mind to enhance themselves, or maybe even teach it in some way, or mindfulness methods which somehow calm the mind and calm the body to bring the person actually into the present moment, are also important techniques for this sign. So, in conclusion, I'd like to say that even though I think that the Aquarian seeks a form of non-attachment to the material realm, non-attachment does not mean no attachment. And that's terribly important to understand for the sign, because although these feelings and irrationalities can somehow seize the day and are a threat to the kind of the lofty ideals of perfectionism, if Aquarius can take hold of that and can embrace the irrational, the unknown, and sometimes just the mythic or the poetic, and following their feelings sometimes, then you can get this kind of balance between the flow of life down from heaven into the earth, and then the experience of life that you have can be then kind of put forward into the evolutionary Akashic records, if you like, so that knowledge can be contribute to the whole. So there needs to be, as I say, this flow. And when that happens, great or small, Aquarius then provides a way of bringing service to the humanity of which he is a part, this human family of which he is a part, which he ultimately is destined to serve.